Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube art tutorial channel. We're entering the old city through what they call the new arch. This week I'm painting a picture of Pisa in Italy. It's a back street with figures. Well, here we go, the drawings on the board. I'm going to use three basic brushes really. I'm going to use a number 8, it's beginning to wear away, mop brush. That's the Sablesque Pro Arty. The number 2 mop brush, Sablesque Pro Arty, and a number 5 rigger, which is also a Pro Art Proline rigger, series 103. So those are the three brushes that I'm going to use, and well, let's get started. Well, there's my mixing tray. I've got burnt sienna in there, raw sienna, cadmium yellow, Windsor blue or Prussian blue. If you use Windsor blue, it's I think it's the red shade that I've got in there, cobalt blue, French ultramarine, cadmium red. I've got 2 cadmium yellows. I don't know why, but it's just to fill up really. A light red, a burnt umber, an Indian red, and an alizarin crimson. And can you see them shine? I've wetted them all up so that they become supple. It's quite warm here in the studio, so I want to supple them up really. And I've damped my large mop ready for action. Now my thoughts behind this scene is that I'm going to have, this is all in shadow, that's in shadow. So I've got the light sort of just coming from here, so it'll catch all the figures and that building there, but it won't catch that building because it's behind that, but it's just catching the flags. So, but of course, all under here is like a market affair. It's more or less the tourist side of the market, really, of the Pisa, which is pretty much tourism anyway. But I wanted to paint a little side street, and what I'm using is cobalt blue to wet the paper. So I'm using that really just to wet the paper, a very, well, not very, but a fairly weak mix. And I'm just damping the paper, but I'm trying to keep some areas unpainted. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to damp over the distant building as well. So that, let's make so that runs down, there you go. So that is quite an interesting thing to do actually, because there's a reason behind this. There we go. And let's go around this side of that flag. It's a flag. It denotes certain aspects of this ancient, well, fairly ancient, not that ancient to be fair, but part of Italy. And going to go up there like that, across there. Don't want that to hold too much paint, that bit there. There we go. And oh yes, of course, that goes there. Remember the overhangs of these buildings there and there, all very important. And I've gone over that area there. Can I keep the flagpole light? I'm going to try. At least get a little bit of light on that flagpole anyway. Watch that as well. So I'm damping the paper. I'm going to damp again, because I want that to remain damp for a moment or two as I work down, because that's going to be quite important to the overall feel of this. So there we go. It's quite warm in here, and there again in the studio, and there again it's always nice if it's warm to you know, because it was a warm day when we were there, so it's always interesting to actually keep that sort of theme going. And I'm going to put in a bit of dark at the top. It will lighten up once it dries. There you go, nice and dark. And then coming down just a little bit lighter above that building, but not too much. There we go, just pull that across. And this is the very first wash required for this particular painting. And all will be revealed shortly. And this sort of method may be useful for some of you to actually use this in other works, because it's always nice to have a backlight coming from the back, really. Virtually self-explanatory, but there you go. That's what's happening here. And just pull that down and let that run. Pull that down and let that run. Or just make certain that's sort of level. There we go. And that's right. I'm maintaining white where I want the light areas. The areas that are either white or unpainted. And I've got some areas of shrubs in the background. So they could very well, well, they are. They're actually, I'm doing a lot of this from memory. I can memorize exactly how that was. There we are. And we've got a little chappy stand there with a cap on, which I'm going to just bring that down and try and leave that cap unpainted. But other than that, that is my very first wash of colour, and I'm going to let that dry. Now what I want to do now is, while that's drying, I'm going to put some colour onto the foreground. I'm going to use alizarin. You may see the odd fly or two because I've needed to open the door up because it's causing a bit of a problem with the heat in here today. And unfortunately, in the winter, I can obviously knock it back a bit with by putting the heat on. But here, in the summer, you have to more or less take it as it comes. And so what I'm doing, I'm putting in these two figures like that fairly quickly, well, painting around them really. And this is the idea of painting like this. You actually paint the negative, leaving the positive shapes, and the white you leave is pretty much important. It's not the end of the matter, because obviously you can change things by darkening areas, but really it's the first washes that allows us to add light to the subject if necessary. Just trying to think which way this chap's legs were going. Oh, right, like that. Yeah, he was sort of like standing back. He's a cool guy, that one. And that then comes through. This is where the perspective comes in, because this is where the road runs. And that's it. And here we go then. Now we're coming into the foreground. So that's what's this chap carrying? Oh, that's a coat that he's got over his arm. Oh well, we'll try and use that if we can, because it's always an interesting feature. If you can bring in something different to the subject like that, it's always handy. And this one is quite well in the foreground, this little this chappy here. And this then is a display case that is quite interesting, actually, the way in which this sort of subject has built up. Make one leg longer than the other, invariably the shortest leg is actually heading backwards. So I'm going to do that in reverse on that one, so as we can try and get the feeling that one leg is just slightly forward to the other. See that? See how the legs are slightly forward? That always helps to give that impression. And as I come into the foreground, while it's still damp, I'm going to put a bit of yellow in that and try and just give this a sense that there's a little bit of light, a nice yellow sunlight on this area here, which in actual fact there is, but that will enhance it when it all dries. Ideal for when we wipe shadows over that. So that is the foreground road pretty much put in. Now I've moved to the slightly smaller mop and I've painted in what will be mostly sunlit buildings. There'll be some shadow there, but we've obviously got and these Italian southern Italian the Riviera sort of towns along the coast, they all have lovely pastel colours, so they will be in sunlight. I've used raw sienna with a little light red for that one. This one has a little bit of the cobalt blue in there, purely to make it look green, and this one is just weaker, and I've just whipped around with the same colour as that all underneath, because a lot of that will be in shadow. So that's what I've done on the left. Now the building on the right hand side is going to have this is in shadow. So what I'm doing, I'm painting around these windows. I think it's a good idea to start, and any areas that are light, and I'm painting in what will be a dark sort of brown, because that is pretty much the colour that it was in shadow, so it's quite dark. And as I head down, I'm going to add some cobalt blue to that, because I want it to be even darker in the lower areas. That way you get a sense of light on there that you don't get if you don't treat it in that way. It's all a matter of lights and darks. You can't get lights unless there's dark areas, and vice versa really. You can't get dark areas unless there's light. So you counterchange one against the other. And if you do that, you can't go wrong. Well, you can go wrong, but right, yeah, just checking where, just having a think about where we're going with this. Right, I'm going to finish that there. May leave that white, I don't know yet. And that then heads down to there. Then I'm going to leave a bead of white, so because that's a little ridge there, but I'm allowing, just joining that up so that that runs off. Trying to get a run, I'm joining that up so it all runs back rather than, there we go. The flag itself is going to be left white at this stage, and there wasn't really any wind about, but it was you know, it was a little windy, a little bit of a breeze, so they are fluttering in the breeze, which all adds to the feeling of movement, which is something there again that I like to sort of connect up to. There we are. Notice how I've put a bit in the top there, leaving certain parts unpainted, but there you go. Now that's a covering for that area. It's like a, well, not parasol, but it's a covering of some sort, and then that comes through like that. Haven't really managed to save that. May use a little bit of white perhaps. if I need that flagpole to be left white, which I should have done really, but I've sort of like stepped away from that, don't know why. Now I'm going to have to just take a bit of moisture off the brush and lift away those areas, because I don't want those to look too dark. And that area there, that's good. See how we've got a film of dark colour onto that particular area. And then I'm going to go in with a little more light red, a little bit more yellow, because I want this tends to reflect the light a little differently there. Don't want any white, it should be dry. And we've got a window there, so it's not a vital area, but does need to be produced in a similar sort of fashion. And there's just a little spike at the end of those poles, so if I remember rightly. So that's always handy. And there you have it. That will do for that particular area. And this is where the fun bit starts, because I'm going to paint in the background. Now I'm just looking for my mill stick. I've got it. Because I'm going to paint in the building, right? Not the roof of the building at this stage, although I think I might. Yeah, there you go. I'm painting the building, and because the blue is already there, it will naturally darken this colour wash. There we go. So I'm loading the brush fully, and I'm painting quickly so as not to remove the underpainting. Now I'm going to go straight across. I'm trying to keep that fairly straight. Notice I'm not rubbing at the colour. Now I'm going to go, I'm trying to get a clean wash of colour, and that's got to be lighter than that I've just painted. That's also vital. There we are. Just stroke the colour in. Really is very important. Some papers stain more than others. This one I'm using doesn't stain, so obviously the colour could very well come off. Now I'm going a little darker, so I'm adding a little bit of burnt umber in there, because I want that to show through. It is a greeny brown, yeah, greeny brown basically. So it has got a little bit of burnt umber, but it's also, whoops, I'll knock the easel over at this stage, but it's also got some blue in there, which is already on the paper. So that's a bonus. So you don't have to put blue with it. The blue will shine through the wash of colour you've already got. So there you go. That's not difficult, is it? Not really. Once you realise what you've got to do, that's what I'll say about painting to people that are new, you know. It's only being told the reasons why you're doing something that actually gives you a chance of, well, painting the same. So all the professional artists know all these tricks, and we're telling you as well. So that's good of us as well. Not really. That's how I learnt mine, from other artists, and that's been handed down the centuries from one to another. So don't be afraid to pick up tips from other artists. Right, now this is where I'm adding a little cobalt to that, which will darken that, almost make it more of a burnt umber really. The reason for this is because in that lower area, and I don't want it just to be a band of it, I want it to, so go back in. Right, now this is where I'm going to pick around those light areas, and then when we paint them a very light colour of what they are, with their figures, trees, hedges, they will show up in sunlight. So that's that lovely background that I saw while walking around the old part of Pisa while on my cruise around the Med, and it obviously rang out in my mind because I can remember a lot of this. I do have a sketch and a little photograph, but nothing that would really, unless you've been, you would not be able to appreciate what I'm trying to achieve here. Well, certainly you wouldn't be able to paint it, I don't think. I think it's important that if you're going to paint something, it's always nice to go and see it. A photograph is good, but not it's not always going to give you a sense of the place, a feeling of the place. And there is the wash for the background. Now while that's drying, I'm going to paint in these windows because they're green, shuttered. So I'm going to paint that in. They're painted green, so I've just used cobalt and raw sienna, like that. Doesn't matter if it's a bit darker at the bottom. Don't really want too much light there because it's all in shadow, and yet it's reflecting light. You know, the way to capture light is always be aware of the reflections of light from the buildings this side back onto these buildings. So if you're too dark with those, you don't get that reflected light feeling. Now you may be able to hear the rain. I've got my door open, obviously I've got all sheltered over there. As you can see, I've put in the tops and some of the legs of, or the trousers, those that are wearing jeans or whatever, fairly dark. I've tried to balance the colours. I'm going to have a lot of colour here with these flowers, these flags. So this side I need that splash of red, but as I go back I'm going to lose the feeling of colour, because that will put the figures in the background away and these will be more forward. So that's what I'm going to do now. But in the meantime, just want to put on their flesh colours, because until you get the flesh colours in, you're not really you haven't really created that sort of a feeling of light. There's a face there, there's a face there, that could be a light-haired person, and that is neck and shoulders on that figure, and this figure is sort of hands on hips, I seem to remember, which is always a funny thing to do, but it seemed to work there. And notice I'm actually using a light red pretty much, because it is warm, so they will be pretty much in sort of with shaded faces. Well, any of the flesh colours really. This fella probably is looking slightly to the left, like that. Legs, yes, something that we need to be aware of. Try not to make them dead straight. Just put a little bit of muscle to them. You know, all, you know, shapes of figures vary obviously, but it's always nice to give plenty of variation, because I think it adds to it, adds to the feel. I'm not putting the feet in as such at the moment. In actual fact, I probably won't at all. Well, this figure also has flesh tones. Was quite warm, so no reason to believe they're not in shorts and open tops, like that. There we are. Okay, so that's pretty much, oh, there's a hand there, or an arm, there's a hand there, there's a face there, that these are looking towards us, and that one is too. Like that. Oh, and a little bit of a hand there. Anywhere else I've missed at this stage? Not at this, oh, there. There we go. We're getting a real bit of rain out there, which is much appreciated here in the UK. Now I'm going to paint in the figures in the background, and as you can see, I've put the heads in similar height to the heads of the figures in the foreground, right? But as I get to the bottom, I'm using the rigger because I don't want it to melt away too much, just to melt away the underside into that more foreground area. So it's just given an impression that there's a soft shadow there. See that? We've got hard at the top, then all of a sudden I'll bring in light colours again at the top. So all I'm doing is dotting in a head, putting in a shape, another little head there, dotting in a shape, and this dark colour is in effect giving me the sort of the background to these lighter figures now that are now coming out into clear relief against these background impression of figures. So it's like that. And we've got to get just inside their arms there, like that, and just going to leave a bead of white around the edge of that one because it's a very dark figure, so that will help show up that light side, not perhaps underneath but on the tops. Then as I come down, I'm blending those all together and then doing the same thing, just using a damp brush just to blend those in to a more softer edge, like that. There we go. It's running down a bit, but that's working okay. I've got to sweep shadow over that anyway, and that's what I'm doing really. I've done all the arms and legs of the figures in the foreground. Now I'm looking in the background to put in these varying shapes that some darker than others, so I'm going to go a bit darker now but I always keep it cool in the background, plenty of blues in the mix, just dropping a little bit more into those just to try and get a variation. I want to be a little bit darker with some of those, and when it's wet of course that'll bleed in very nicely. There we are, dropping that in while it's still a little wet. And this one there is, well, I mean, I'm making these figures up, you know, you obviously can see that because it's just very much an impression of it. It also helps to a bit more blue in that, not enough blue. Did drop a bit of brown in that, which I don't really need. There we go. A little bit of light, wouldn't be on the back edge of that figure, but having said that. And then of course you can shape the foreground figures if you haven't quite got their shapes right. Using that sort of you know, shaping of the figures really, and then of course we then come down again and we allow that to dry through to that sort of level. Left hand side we have red parasols, well at least this one is, and so is that one. Oh, that's red, right? Yes, I remember that. That's sort of like one that just comes away from the wall that they've not actually pulled out yet. This one is red, and that helps balance the whole complete picture up, I think, which is always a lovely thing if you get good balance within your paintings, which I think I have there. A lovely bit of red. Is the other one red? Do you know? It's going to be. It's not going to be quite as tough. It's just going to have a little bit of brown put in, so it's not quite as stark as that one in the front. Just to set it back, it's all about getting feel of depth within these colours, because not only the size of the colours or the size of the figures or the objects, it's also very much about the colours giving depth. So those parasols have gone in. Now, as you can see, I put the flags in their varying tones, just to give them a bit of movement. Yellow and white and red, presumably Italian, and that is probably another, not sure about flags, not good on flags. And there's another one with some sort of emblem in the middle. But this is where the real fun starts. Well, we just found ourselves a lovely little restaurant, but it's not quite lunch, so we're going to have a cappuccino. And there it is. And in the meantime, we'll do myself a little sketch, something to take back as a very happy memory of the town or city of Pisa. I've mixed up a very dark sort of muddy green, so you know, because the background has these lovely windows and overhangs that are painted in this green, and that to me probably is not dark enough. No, that needs to be darker, so I'm just adding more paint, less water. I'm using a brown, a yellow and ultramarine for this, because in actual fact, to make it dark you just need more ultramarine. Why didn't I think of that? Yeah, of course it does. There you go. That's nice and dark, and there's also a bead that runs, it's the underside of the roof. You can't quite see the roof, the very shallow roof areas here, and that finishes there. It's all in shade, and I seem to remember, although I've not drawn it in, we do have the corner of that building. Don't know where this brickwork must be, but that has a piece of interesting architecture that more like cornerstones that you get in the Cotswolds, I suppose, and that sort of thing. And then there's the windows. They're only surrounds, but the windows themselves will be darker shortly. Now, do we have a... Yes, we do have. Let's just add a bit more blue to that. Don't want these to stand out too bright. We do have the same this side. There we go. And we have a line across the bottom there. And now these have an arch before you get to the window, which is always interesting to have that sort of thing. There we go. Just nice if you can use, and you see, the more you do for the background, the more it shows up the sense of light in the distant area, or the foreground, sorry. And this then comes down to there, and then we have a line running across there, and these are pretty much flat tops, although they have a little bit of interesting architecture. Not architecture, but shape, like that. This is the same, so you know, we just continue producing the same on all of these windows. It's always nice if you can pick up, because it's all about the architecture of the region. That's what I'm looking to capture. The architecture of the region. Which is pretty much Tuscany, I suppose. If you go a bit high, just whip it up there. There you go. Try not to make them look like a cat's face, but little deviations away from the original is not going to be the end all of it. It really is a matter of main thing is you get an impression. And I know I'm banging on an awful lot about impression, but it really is. And I know some of you may think that these are a little bit dark, but the point is, just stop talking for a moment while I sweep across with that. I don't know whether it's a sill area of some sort, but it's painted in the same green, and it continues pretty much out of picture like that. There we go. And I'm going to now continue with the rest of the windows, because I've pretty much shown you everything that I'm going to do on that. Now, as you can see, I've completed all those windows, a little bit of balustrade there, and I've left one or two beads of the underpainting to give a definition between the door and the the architecture or details around the outside of the main door. The other thing I want to do, with perhaps not quite as dark as that, is to put in, I do have windows this side with the same colour. Whether it's something that is required in this area, we don't know, but that's all we've got to do for these windows. Nothing too much more simpler than that, really. That's a bit high, so we make that one higher. And these ones there again they're a little wider. Well, they're bigger windows. I know the buildings are coming nearer to us, and they get more narrow as they go away. There we go. That's the reason. The nearer they are, the wider they are. Further away, the more narrow. And you can just adjust the perspective by touching tops or bottom to make them up, you know, make them the right sort of height and shape, really. So that's that. We do have the odd window here, but they're well, we do have windows, but of course they're all merged together, so they're pretty much just all merged together, basically. Not an important area. Now, for the figures at the tables were more or less dark green, but you know, I'm just using this blue for almost everything, really. Just the parasol legs there, and we do have the old chairs of some sort, and I'm not really putting these in too much of a, you know, they're just dark, because I don't want to show too much in the way of detail in these, because if you do, you're saying too much about the figures, you know, and we don't want to tell people too much about what's going on in the background. And I'm just going to add some faces to those with I'm using burnt umber this time, not used that yet in any of the others, but that will give us the face sort of colour. And some faces are looking one way, some are looking another. Some are darker than others, but it just gives you that feeling of heads and arms, perhaps legs, because obviously we're in a very hot area, and that is pretty much all I'm going to do for that until I sweep shadow in. Oh, I'm going to put in the parasol, the actual supports for the parasols, the actual posts, like that. Right, what else have I got to put in? Right, and I like the way that parasol is not dead upright. Quite often see that with parasols. Now I need to get the greenery in the background, and I've mixed up lemon yellow, little cobalt, to get a nice sort of what I'd class as a summery green. Just watch for that figure's hair. That's another issue. Hair on figures, heads, they all need to be allowed to stay. Right, now I'm adding blue to that, and that is ultramarine blue, because I want that to darken very, very quickly. So what I'm doing, what do I do first? Oh, well, there we go. Let's take this side, because this potentially is going to show up the tops of those figures. Not being too dark with this at this stage. You can always darken it for obvious reasons. See the way the light now shows on those figures. You can leave some touches of white here and there. The hair on that figure running back like that. May put a hat on that, not sure yet. And then we come down into the real dark area that's more blue with a little Indian red. Not too much Indian red, because we don't need, and I'm just, would that work if I dropped it in there? I suppose it would. Yeah, the back edge of that, because obviously with these clumps, the sun's coming from behind, but they're still got a little bit of back edge. There we go. Now we'll be able to see that the figure, that head there, a little bit of hair down that side, bit of hair on the top. Don't cut the hair away too much. Little glints of light on that figure. Now I'm going to paint across and down, because this is the hedging in the background. That figure there, don't give him too much hair. There you go. Could be a little hat. There we go. Well, that's what I'm calling it anyway, because that just looks like a little hat, that's all. And then we come in close there and down. So that's pretty much that, which will help now to highlight a sense of shadow in that background. And that would also, that's also probably one of those hedges that are in complete shadow. So that will also be dark. Okay? And then you allow that to completely dry. While that's drying, I'm going to paint in another very light wash of colour. Hope they're dry. Perhaps not quite, but I'm hoping that I can get away with it, because I don't want to mess around here too long. So that gives a hint that we've got a window within a window there. And it's only a hint, because if I start painting all sorts of detail there, then I'm going to lose the detail in the foreground. You know, I need real high detail in the foreground, and that is something that I don't want to do. So this is just, notice how quickly I'm painting, because I've got a wet brush, because I don't want to lift off the underpainting. There we go. Don't think I have. You'll soon know, because it'll come up muddy, and that's a good test as to whether you've actually produced the right sort of, whether you've rubbed at the paper too much. Just one more to do. That's the lower area there. Hoping these are dry, although a couple of them are still a little damp, so I'll be very, very careful. A little darker here for the door. Not sure why. Oh, it's a dark area above the door there. Oh, it's more or less a recess, so we'll just show a crossed recess like that. There we go. That helps to give an opening effect, I think. Just having to raise that to match up with that. Doesn't matter. Let's cover all of that. Didn't look right, so if it don't look right, don't leave it. Do something else to it. But don't, obviously, keep rubbing at the paper, because once it's wet, it will create quite a unusual colour, which you don't need. I just can see something that's just caught my eye. A little gap there, little gap there, little gap there. That's all. There you have it. Now, how do you treat this? That is very, very sort of complicated, this area. So much detail. But I want to simplify it. I don't want all of that detail. So I'm putting some sort of reds in first, and I'm starting in the foreground there, leaving some whites and leaving the tops, because we've got like a not parasol, but a covering. So that's that. I'm also going to go in with a little bit of yellow here and there. Around the figures a little. There we go. And as we go further back, I want to maintain that cap on that figure. And that figure is nice and dark, which is all very good for what we're looking to put in here. And then I'm going with a little bit more red and just not so much colour. Notice how I've whipped away the colour strength and allowed that to be less intense. Figure in there, something on the brush there, but I'm not worried. There you go. Don't know what that is there, but we'll see when we come to paint. And so really it's an impression. Now we've got to get the shadow area in just at the right time. Here we go. Now the shadow is ultramarine or alizarin crimson with a little bit of the other colours in there. I can't tell it, well, a bit of a mix of all the colours really. And I want a warm shadow, so enough alizarin in there to create that sort of blurred illusion of varying things going on without defining anything too clearly, and fairly straight across the top. But as we come down, this is where it will get rather interesting. Fairly straight across the top, because that's got to be the darkest area, and as you come down it will get a little bit lighter. because if you look at these sort of subjects, as you come down, you're getting more reflected light into the scene. Go. See that, how I'm getting reflected light in there? And there we go. It's still damp. So little touches here and there, just to give the illusion of something going on around that. That figure's interested in something there. We're not sure what. And there's just one or two little, you can see some harder edges being formed now. And that's always good. And right at the top, we're adding more blue and more alizarin. More blue this time, because we're looking for a darker tone. Considerably darker in this foreground, and blurred as it comes down. There. So it's really, you know, varying things going on there, but we don't want to attract the eye too much, you know, to it. A bit more blue required now as I go further back, not quite so much red. And I'm trying to paint this very, very quickly, as you've probably noticed. I'm trying to get rid of some of these light areas now, but I do like the sense of light around that figure. Don't want to go too dark too early, but I am adding just a little bit more colour to the brush. There we go. And then this is where the darker tone shows up the lighter tones of the figures, and the lighter tones of the figures show up the darker areas of other parts. So as you can see, it's a win-win, if that's sort of thing that should be said at this stage. Well, at the moment I think we're winning, but that will all depend on what we end up with. And that's always interesting. What are we going to end up with? Oh, that's his bag. Hold up. Or her, not sure what that is. But then I'm going to come right the way down to try and pick up where the finish of that area is. Right? And that, so as we've got a sense of perspective there. And I'm going to use the large mop to soften that, because that just gives me a little bit more license to pull that through. There you go. So that's pulled that through, and it's created an area where we can see that that's undercover, basically. Good. Now, while that's drying off and we've got the idea of tone, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint the rest of the shadows in. Now, these figures are in shadow, and their shadows come towards us. So, or not quite towards us, but, you know, that sort of thing. And because it's pretty midday, the shadows come like that, but they're not very long. They must come from the figures themselves. They all have to come at that same angle, because if they don't, then you're not going to get that effect. Could be a bit of perspective. I'm saying the same angle, probably not, but anyway. A little bit longer in the foreground. That one is further forward than that, so that one's got to sit back. And this one, the shadow will go out of picture. So from the base of the foot, that comes towards us, that comes towards us like that, but basically it goes out of picture. Then we add a little more blue to the mix to create the somewhat slightly weaker, so a bit more water gone in, a bit more blue, the weaker shadows for the figures in the background, and we mustn't be too long with those. Right, now parasols, we'd have a shadow on the underside there like that and like that. Right, we're going to have the sun coming across, so some of this will be in shadow because it's from that building, you see, and that comes round. I'm not worried about the shadow in the foreground yet, but which wouldn't be great. And then we have shadows then from the parasols in the background like that. And I'm just imagining these because that's about all I can do, because I've got no sort of, it's just trying to get a bit of experience as to what the shape of these shadows would have been if they, and that is in shadow too, and so is that parasol post. Must remember that they will be in shadow, and that may be elongated. It's a nice word, because that's really close to that wall. I think that's probably got it. And then that's in shadow. I know that because I can remember that, which is always useful to remember shadows. And that comes down to the ground. There's a shadow under there and under there. Right, now this parasol, some of it is in shadow, or the ones this side, and some aren't. We've got an area there that is, but then we've got an area that isn't till you hit the bottom there where it is again. These are not in shadow, but the left hand, the right hand side of those there, that comes out down to there, this is in shadow like that, so we can see little areas of light. So it's not all in shadow, but a lot of it is. Yeah, that's good. And now this is where we get to real dark shadows, and I'm still going to use those same three colours, but I'm going to paint them a little darker, because we've got a lovely warm shadow that's casting up there out of picture like that. Always a good colour to show up lights. A bit more blue, perhaps it was a little on the strong side there, a little on the red side. Don't be too red, that's better. And of course this side is in sunlight, so we have a nice overhang shadow there. Always the best thing to paint is the overhang shadows. It's the thing that tells you that that is in sunlight. That building is in sunlight, and we've got a sort of overhang shadow there with an overhang shadow there. There we are. Look at that. So that brings out the real sunlight that is typical Tuscany feel, and a little bit lighter now and a little bit more blue, because I'm going to have to put in a little bit of shadow on this, on these figures with white jeans like that. Put down the legs there perhaps, just to help blend. But we don't want to do too much to that. And a little bit of shadow to connect the feet up with the figure. And just pull them up with your finger if you have to. Pull them down, there we go. Bit of shadow there. Well, you can hear that rain again. A little bit of extra shadow on the hair because they're not all white. Yeah, that's okay. That's pretty much as I would sort of expect these figures to look. Yeah, got some finishing touches to go in, but at this stage it's very much let it dry and see what we've got. Now, using this shadow colour, I'm just going to introduce some other figures that are in the background here. Heads need to be fairly high, that are sort of just a little bit dark, that for figures in this sort of, there we go. And just one or two little hints of figures in the backgrounds there. Could be children, some of them a little bit a bit shorter, just to give that additional sort of feel to them, and just blend that away. Fingers are always handy, come in very handy. And I'm just adding a little colour to these now, so that because we're getting near to that figure there, so I'm adding a little bit of colour, just putting in some shapes that I think will work for these figures in that particular area. Really don't want to put too many here. And what we've got here is different colour again, bit of red, not too much, not too fierce. It's sort of like a hoarding area, or a, how can I put it, an area that's hanging sort of interesting bits and pieces. Don't mind showing a little bit of that, because that's what it was like. Don't forget perspective, always vital. Go. And we're pretty much there. One or two finishing touches and shadows, really. Just going to flick in some lovely little finishing touches. Always a good thing to do. If you think, yeah, well, this chap had a bag of some sort, so I'm going to put that in like that, and that coat was sort of like laying on it, really. So that was the reason why he'd got that coat over his arm like that, and it sort of had a bit of thingy under there, bit of that, and then he had this cap on that had peak to it. Quite an interesting feature. But then he had, that was all shadow then, and then I'm going to blend that through. Got to be lighter than the background, but that gives him a darker face. There we go. And then would just show up a little darker there. There we go. See what I mean? It's spotting these dark areas where the arm comes down underneath there. That's the way you spot these dark areas of shadow, and you just highlight them really. Some of them have got dark sort of shoes. Don't put shoes on that figure, and that then comes under there like that, from the back edge down to there, under there like that. That would be darker. So really I'm just looking at the secondary and third shadow work. Any creases in the legs, just got to watch, but generally if you're fairly careful should not be a problem. This figure had a cap on and the peak was forward like that. Quite high up. Well, it is now. Like that. And this, no, that figure, no, that was that, right? Yes. Got a bit of colour to put on there, but I'm trying to get in little touches where these figures would have had just a little bit extra dark colour. Motifs under their chins perhaps, as that runs through like that. Just soften it with the finger. The neck, oh, a camera. Well, what about a camera around the neck? Well, it's the first time I've painted a camera on anybody. Look at that. That chap's got a camera. Isn't that marvellous? Isn't it that easy? Darker under there, a little bit there, a little bit there. A little bit there. Under there. It all helps to highlight the figure itself. There we go. I've got a feeling that we've got to sort of more or less start thinking about calling it a day, really. I mean, I do like to have, you know, there's another thing that I like to do sometimes, is to give a little bit of this red light as the legs come away, you know. I don't know, it just adds a bit of glimmer, a bit of glint to the whole thing. Under the figure perhaps. Yeah, it does help, I think. Give these shadows a little bit of a lift too. But generally, one thing I have missed, and that has to go in, there's no question about that, and that is the shadow on this building here. Forgot that is in shadow, so that's coming down, and that needs a weakening with some red. Now, dark underneath there, and that shows up the corner of that building with a red touch of colour. There we go. That then finishes there like that. No windows in that, and just as well, because it is you know, I don't want that to appear too interesting. Really, you know, it really is something that I don't want to highlight. That's out of picture. That's not of any real significance. So that is a way out of picture. These are the most important areas. And finally, Let's do this pavement with a bit of colour on there. Good. A little bit of cream. We're looking for cream. To me, that's pretty much the yellow, because that's really all of the cream I require, I think. And that is for these areas that have got sunlight on them, and that's just raw sienna. Let's just put a bit of red in there just to give it some warmth. A little bit more red. This helps a feeling of warmth, I think. Not a bad idea to use a bit of that red underneath here, because that gives that a sense of definition. There we go, look at that. Clearly defines the underside. A bit more blue now going into that red. Don't want to affect the figures there too much. That's right. And then into that you get the rigger with lots of paint on there. A bit of blue and a bit of red. And that then can then be drawn into that to create that sort of depth feel, blurred depth that that you would expect to see when sunlight hits an area like that. There we go. And that, I think, perhaps with even a tad more. There we go. Just to define certain areas of this. Just adding more blue in. There's just a bit of lines going in like that. Don't want to make too much of it, but you know, it's just so that people think, well, there's something going on there. You know, what is it? I don't know. While it's wet into wet, we don't really care. Nice edge down the back there. Always helps to show light into the underside there. And we said we had a fella here with a cap on. So I'm putting the peak in like that, and I'm bringing that down there like that. There we go. Don't do too much to that. Too far away to be too interesting. Okay, we're pretty much there. Let me take the surround away and sign it up. Well, there it is. That's the subject for this Friday, and it's a scene. It's sort of like a side road of Pisa. Decided not to do the Leaning Tower and all that business, so decided to paint a back street, a little bit of a touristy area. You can see people picking up their normal take-home keepsakes, memorabilia, but I thought I liked the way the light comes in against the flags and the figures, and I've you know, put figures in to actually complement the composition. And that's the key when you look at this sort of subject. Look, it's getting the light on the figures, but also having enough balance within the figures themselves, because they're a big part of the subject. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and if you have, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Colinsteedart on YouTube, and we'll see you all again next time. Thank you for watching.